A mother's heart breaks in ways that can never be described when she's told her baby didn't survive birth. For Emma, this day was supposed to be the most beautiful moment of her life, the day she would finally hold her child, after months of anticipation and love growing for this little life inside her. But instead, she was met with the words that no mother should ever hear. The doctors had tried everything, they said. They told her her baby was stillborn, gone before he had a chance to take his first breath. Emma felt numb. How could this be happening? Everything had seemed fine, right up until the last moments. But the beeping machines, the concerned looks from the nurses, and the heavy, suffocating air in the delivery room confirmed the tragedy. Her husband, Mark, stood beside her, just as lost and broken as she was. His hands trembled as he tried to comfort her. But there were no words strong enough to fix this. The hospital room grew colder by the second. As the reality set in, they told Emma she could say goodbye to her child before he was taken to the morgue. But Emma refused. She couldn't bear to see the lifeless body of the baby she had carried for 9 months. She felt hollow, like a piece of her soul had been torn away, leaving nothing but sorrow. Hours passed, but Emma couldn't rest. Something gnawed at her from the inside, something she couldn't explain, an unsettling feeling she couldn't shake. She tossed and turned in the sterile hospital bed, her mind racing. She was exhausted, but sleep wouldn't come. Mark was sitting quietly beside her, his head in his hands, trying to process the grief in his own way. In the dead of night, Emma decided she couldn't let it go. Her heart was telling her that something wasn't right. She needed to see her baby, if only to hold him one last time. With a quiet determination, she rose from the bed, careful not to wake Mark. The hospital corridors were eerily quiet, lit only by the dim glow of fluorescent lights as she made her way to the morgue. Her footsteps echoed in the hall, the sound bouncing off the walls, making the journey feel longer than it was. She didn't know what she was expecting, but she knew she had to go. As she approached the cold metal door of the morgue, her pulse quickened. She paused for a moment, her hand hovering over the handle, her breath shaky. This was it. Emma stepped inside, and the cold air hit her like a wave. The room was silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigeration units. Her eyes scanned the room, searching for her baby, and then she saw him, wrapped in a white blanket, his tiny body placed carefully on a metal table. Tears filled her eyes as she walked toward him, but something else caught her attention. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw a figure, a doctor, standing in the shadows, his back turned to her. He was writing something on a clipboard, muttering to himself. It struck her as odd. Why would a doctor be in the morgue at this hour? Emma's instincts told her to stay quiet, but curiosity got the better of her. She slowly moved closer, trying not to make a sound, and then she heard it. The doctor whispered something under his breath, something that made Emma's heart stop. She wasn't supposed to find out. Emma froze. What did he mean? What wasn't she supposed to find out? Her eyes widened as a wave of panic washed over her. She stepped closer, her breathing shallow, and as she did, she caught a glimpse of something that made her blood run cold. The doctor's hands were trembling, and on the table beside him, there was a small vial, marked with the word sedative. Suddenly, the pieces started to come together in Emma's mind. Her baby, her perfectly healthy baby, wasn't stillborn by some tragic accident. Something had gone wrong, something much darker. Emma's heart pounded in her chest as the realization hit her like a freight train. She didn't know the full story yet, but one thing was clear. This was no accident. And in that moment, Emma knew she had to act fast. But how? Should she confront the doctor? Should she run for help? Fear and confusion swirled inside her, but there was no time to waste. She couldn't let the doctor know she had overheard him. Not yet. Her eyes darted toward the door, but before she could move, the doctor turned around, and their eyes met. Now, Emma was caught in a moment that could change everything. Was her baby really gone? Or was there something more sinister at play? The truth was just within reach, but getting it would mean facing a dangerous secret that could cost her everything. And that's when it happened. The doctor's face, usually calm and professional, twisted into a cold, calculated smile. "I see. You've come to say goodbye," he said softly, his voice laced with something far more sinister than sympathy. Emma's pulse raced, her heart nearly leaping out of her chest. She needed to make a choice, and fast. What would she do next? Emma stood frozen, her mind racing as the doctor's words hung in the air. That smile. It was so wrong. Everything about this situation felt wrong, like she had stepped into some kind of nightmare. Her baby, the doctor, the morgue, none of it made sense. Yet here she was, face to face with a man who clearly wasn't telling the truth. She could feel the coldness of the room seeping into her bones, but she didn't dare move. Her eyes flickered toward the small vial again, and her heart sank. What was the doctor doing here? And why was he acting like this? I just needed a moment, Emma stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. She had to think quickly. Confronting him now felt too dangerous. She needed more information, but most of all, she needed time. The doctor took a step closer, his smile fading into something more serious, his eyes narrowing as if trying to read her mind. "It's hard, isn't it?" he said, his tone softer now, almost empathetic. "Losing a child. It leaves a scar." Emma nodded slowly, trying to keep her face neutral. She couldn't let him know what she had overheard, not yet. If he suspected anything, she didn't know what he might do next. Her mind was a whirlwind of questions. What had happened to her baby? Was he really gone? Or had something else, something more sinister, taken place? As the doctor turned back to his clipboard, Emma's thoughts drifted back to the day she had first met him. Dr. Mitchell had been her obstetrician for the last few months of her pregnancy, recommended by the hospital. He seemed like any other doctor, professional, polite, maybe a bit distant. But now, standing here in the morgue with him, she couldn't shake the feeling that he had been hiding something all along. Was it possible that her baby had been taken from her on purpose? The very thought made her stomach turn. Emma needed answers, but she wasn't going to get them here. Not with him watching her every move. She glanced again at the door, wondering if she could make a quick escape without raising suspicion. But, just as she considered it, Dr. Mitchell spoke again. "You know," he said, his voice calm. "Sometimes things happen that are beyond our control. Babies don't always make it, no matter how much we want them to." He paused, as if weighing his next words carefully. "But some people have a harder time accepting that." Emma felt a chill run down her spine. What was he trying to say? Was this his way of warning her? Or was he testing her, trying to see how much she knew? She swallowed hard, her throat dry. She needed to play along, at least for now. "I understand," she whispered, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "It's just hard to believe." Dr. Mitchell gave her a long look, then nodded. Grief can make people see things that aren't there. It can make them question everything, even when the truth is right in front of them. Emma's mind raced. Was he trying to manipulate her, make her doubt herself? She couldn't let that happen. She had heard what he said earlier. There was something more to this, and she wasn't about to let him cover it up. But just as she was about to respond, the door to the morgue creaked open. Emma's heart skipped a beat as a nurse stepped into the room, her face surprised to see them both there. "Dr. Mitchell, we need you upstairs," the nurse said, her voice cutting through the tension. "There's an emergency in the NICU." The doctor glanced at Emma one last time before turning toward the nurse. "Of course," he said, his professional mask slipping back into place. He walked toward the door, but paused just before leaving, his eyes locking onto Emma's. "Take care," he said softly, then disappeared into the hallway. Emma stood there, her body trembling, as she tried to process what had just happened. She was alone now, the morgue eerily quiet again. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but there was no one left to hear her. Her eyes drifted back to her baby, still wrapped in that white blanket, so small, so fragile. With the doctor gone, the weight of everything crashed down on her. What was she supposed to do now? She had no proof, only a gut feeling and a few cryptic words. But she couldn't let it go, not when there was even the slightest chance that her baby was still alive, or that something far more terrible had been done to him. Emma's mind flashed to Mark. He had no idea what was happening. No idea that his wife was standing in the morgue, piecing together a mystery that could tear their world apart. Should she tell him? Would he believe her? She didn't even fully understand what she believed yet, but she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't go back to that hospital room and pretend everything was okay. Taking a deep breath, Emma made her way to the table where her baby lay. She reached out, her fingers trembling, and gently lifted the corner of the blanket. Her breath caught in her throat as she saw his tiny face. He looked so peaceful, so perfect. But there was something off, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. And then she saw it, a small, almost invisible bruise on the side of his neck. It was barely noticeable, but it was there, and it sent a jolt of fear through her. Why would her baby have a bruise like that? What had really happened in the delivery room? Her heart pounded as a new wave of fear and determination surged through her. She didn't have all the answers yet, but she knew one thing. This wasn't over. There was more to this story, and she was going to find out the truth, no matter what it took. But before she could think any further, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Someone was coming back. Emma had to act fast. She glanced around the room, her mind racing. If the doctor was involved in something dark, he wasn't working alone. The nurse, the hospital staff, who could she trust? The tension was suffocating, and the fear of being caught was overwhelming. But there was no turning back now. Emma's pulse quickened as the sound of footsteps grew louder. Someone was coming, and if they found her here, she wasn't sure what would happen. She couldn't let them catch her, not after what she had just discovered. The bruise on her baby's neck haunted her, and her heart raced with a mixture of fear and determination. She needed to act fast, without wasting another second. She gently rewrapped her baby in the blanket and took one last look at his peaceful face. She promised herself she would get to the bottom of this, whatever it took. But right now, she had to get out of there. Emma slipped out of the morgue, her footsteps barely audible as she moved through the dimly lit hallway. She could still hear the approaching footsteps behind her, but she didn't dare look back. Her only thought was getting out, getting to safety, and figuring out her next move. She ducked into a nearby stairwell, hiding in the shadows as two nurses walked by, talking quietly. Her heart pounded in her chest, but they didn't see her. She waited a moment longer, then continued her escape. As Emma made her way back to the hospital room, her mind raced with questions. Who could she trust? Was Mark even safe? She couldn't shake the image of the doctor's unsettling smile, his cryptic words still echoing in her mind. The thought that her baby had been harmed intentionally filled her with rage. But she couldn't act out of anger. She needed a plan. If she went to the wrong person, they might cover it up. She had to be smart. When Emma finally reached her hospital room, Mark was still asleep in the chair beside her bed. Unaware of everything that had just happened, she stood by the door for a moment, watching him, her chest tight with emotion. She wanted to wake him up, tell him everything, but would he believe her? Would anyone? Taking a deep breath, she decided to wake him. This wasn't something she could do alone. She shook Mark gently, and he stirred, blinking in confusion as he looked up at her. "Emma, what's wrong?" he asked, his voice groggy. "We need to talk," Emma whispered, glancing nervously at the door. "Something's not right. I went to see the baby. And there's more to this than we've been told." Mark sat up, alarm flashing in his eyes. "What are you talking about?" Emma quickly explained everything. The doctor, the vial, the strange bruise on their baby's neck. As she spoke, Mark's face went pale, and by the time she finished, he was on his feet, pacing the room in disbelief. "This is crazy," he muttered. "Are you saying someone did this to him? On purpose?" "I don't know," Emma admitted, her voice shaking. "But I know something's wrong. We can't just let it go. We have to find out the truth." Mark nodded, his jaw clenched. "Okay, but we need proof. We can't just accuse the doctor without evidence." Emma knew he was right. They needed to be careful, but the truth felt so close now. The next step was clear. They had to get access to the medical records. Anything that might explain what had really happened in that delivery room. Later that night, when the hospital was quiet, Mark made his way to the nurse's station while Emma kept watch. His hands were trembling, but his determination was stronger. He found the file marked with their baby's name, quickly flipping through the pages. And then he saw it, a notation about a sedative, given just moments before the birth. His heart sank. This wasn't part of the plan. When Mark returned with the file, Emma's hands shook as she held the papers. There it was, the proof they needed. The sedative was given without their consent. They had been lied to. But why? Before they could process the full weight of it, a knock came at the door. Emma froze. It was Dr. Mitchell. He walked in, his face calm, as if nothing was wrong. But Emma could see the coldness in his eyes now. "I see you've been busy," he said quietly, glancing at the file in Emma's hands. "It's a shame you didn't trust us." Emma's heart pounded in her chest as she faced the man who had been hiding the truth all along. "Why?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Why did you do this?" Dr. Mitchell's expression didn't change. "There are things you don't understand, Mrs. Parker. Sometimes decisions are made to protect people. It's unfortunate, but your baby was never meant to survive." Emma felt like the world was spinning around her. "What are you talking about? He was healthy. You did this." He took a step closer, his voice low and calculated. "You'll never prove it, and no one will believe you." But Emma wasn't backing down. She had the file, and she had the truth. "Maybe not, but I know what happened, and I won't stop until everyone knows what you did." Dr. Mitchell's eyes darkened. But before he could say another word, the door swung open. A hospital security guard stepped inside, followed by a police officer. Emma had called them while Mark retrieved the file. They had waited for this moment. Dr. Mitchell's face went pale as he realized the trap had been set. The officer stepped forward. "Dr. Mitchell, we need to speak with you. You're under investigation." As the doctor was led out of the room, Emma collapsed into Mark's arms, overwhelmed with relief and exhaustion. It was over. The truth had come to light. Their baby was gone, but at least now they had the answers they deserved. Weeks later, as they prepared to leave the hospital, Emma reflected on everything that had happened. It wasn't the ending she had imagined when she first came here, expecting to hold her newborn in her arms. But the truth mattered, and though it wouldn't bring their baby back, it gave them some closure. Emma held Mark's hand as they walked out of the hospital together, the weight of their loss heavy, but not without hope. They had faced the darkness, and in the end, they had found the strength to uncover the truth, and now they would carry their baby's memory with them forever.